This is a Fox News alert. Good evening. I'm Brett Baer. We will see the special counsel's report in a matter of weeks, if not days. That's the word from Attorney General William Barr in a letter sent to congressional leaders late this afternoon. Barr said the nearly 400-page report by Robert Mueller is undergoing review to redact sensitive information and could be ready for release by mid-April, if not sooner. And President Trump will get to see the report at the same time Congress does. The president says he's not worried about it. Chief White House correspondent John Roberts starts us off tonight from the North Lawn. Good evening, John.
Brett, good evening to you. Democrats had been demanding that the Attorney General William Barr deliver them the Mueller report by this coming Tuesday. And while that won't happen, the Attorney General told them in a letter today they won't have to wait much longer than that. In a letter to Senator Lindsey Graham and Congressman Gerald Nadler this afternoon, Attorney General William Barr said he hopes to be able to release the Mueller report by mid-April, if not sooner. At Mar-a-Lago, President Trump said he is putting his full faith and trust in Barr to release everything he is able.
Well, I have great confidence in the Attorney General, and if that's what he'd like to do, I have nothing to hide. This was a hoax. This was a witch hunt.
In a surprise move, Barr said he has been given full autonomy by the president, writing, although the president would have the right to assert privilege over certain parts of the report, he has stated publicly that he intends to defer to me, and accordingly, there are no plans to submit the report to the White House for a privileged review. Barr did warn that there would likely be redactions in whatever is sent to Congress, that he has to abide by rules on what can and cannot be released. Democrats have complained that a political appointee is in charge of scrubbing the report.
Remember, this Attorney General made clear that he was hostile to the special counsel and opposed to Mueller's inquiry into obstruction of justice.
Today, Barr revealed that he is working hand in glove with Robert Mueller. Barr also complained that the letter he sent to Congress on Sunday was being mischaracterized as a summary of the special counsel's investigation and report. Barr writing his letter was, quote, a summary of its principal conclusions, that is, its bottom line. Barr also said he is available to testify before the Congressional Judiciary Committees on May 1st and 2nd. In addition to the Mueller report, President Trump also had the border on his mind today. Touring a joint federal-state infrastructure project in Florida, the president warning Mexico's new government that he will take dramatic steps if Mexico does not stop new caravans headed to the United States.
And if they don't stop them, we're closing the border. They'll close it, and we'll keep it closed for a long time. I'm not playing games.
The president has threatened to close the border before. On November 19th, DHS did close the border crossing at San Ysidro, California for 3 hours after members of a caravan appeared poised to storm the crossing. President Trump says the dramatic uptick of people being apprehended at the border this year has strained the system to the breaking point.
We have run out of space. We can't hold people anymore. Congress has to fix our broken immigration laws.
In a late afternoon conference call with reporters, the Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, said that closing the border is absolutely on the table, and she warned of significant disruptions to cross-border commerce unless Mexico does something to avoid a closure. Brett?
John Roberts live on the North Lawn. John, thanks.
Out of this breaking letter just sent by the Attorney General William Barr to leaders in both parties up on Capitol Hill include that he's planning to release some version of the Mueller report by mid-April or sooner, the Attorney General says. He adds that this report is roughly 400 pages. That sounds a little longer than the 300 pages or so we heard about. And then an important point where he says that although the president, quote, would have the right to assert executive privilege over certain parts of the report, he has stated publicly he intends to defer to me, and accordingly, there are no plans to submit the report to the White House for a privilege review. So that's important, since Democrats have been suggesting that the White House may have time to scrub this, that maybe they were going to try to cover up some details. Let's bring in our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. React to that privilege question, John, if you will, and what else is standing out in this letter for you?
It's a very important point, and it's actually somewhat surprising, because I was told all along as we were getting close to the release of the Barr summary of the Mueller report findings that in order to get the Mueller report out in any kind of form, It would likely have to involve some sort of review between Attorney General Barr and Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein and Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, and Emmett Flood, who is the in-house counsel here at the White House, on the Mueller investigation, because you have an awful lot of materials in there that would be subject to executive privilege, not the least of which is the transcript of some 30 hours of conversations between Robert Mueller's investigators and Don McGahn, who is the former White House counsel. And then, because there was all this transparency from the White House, which was the suggestion of John Dowd and Ty Cobb, you have thousands, tens of thousands, really, of documents that are in-house White House communications, interagency communications, interpersonal communications, most of which would be subject to executive privilege. And you would think that the White House would want to check to make sure that whoever was reviewing this would be very prudent about what is and is not released. But it would appear, according to the Attorney General, that the President has turned all of the reins of that over to the Attorney General to make the decision, and the White House counsel's office will not be involved here at all, which is really putting a tremendous amount of faith in an individual that the President doesn't really know all that well. I mean, he knows of Bill Barr's reputation. He thinks he's a stellar individual, but it's not the White House counsel. And so I think the President here is, I don't want to say he's taking a risk or he's making a gamble, but he is putting an awful lot of faith in the Department of Justice to thoroughly scrub this thing to make sure that no items that are subject to executive privilege that the White House would not want out there don't get out there.
Yeah, John, important point you make, because about a week ago, as you know, there were reports circulating that the President in private was asking people, phoning them, what do you know about Barr? What do you know about this guy? That maybe he was a little nervous that he didn't know what the letter was going to say that was summarizing the Mueller report. That has now come out, obviously, and the President, we know from his public comments, is pretty positive, pretty high on both the Attorney General and the letter, suggesting that he was cleared at least on collusion. And there's a debate, as you know, coming on what exactly the full Mueller report says about the allegations of obstruction. So jump in on that point.
And because this has just come out, I haven't had a chance to check with Rudy Giuliani and Jay Sekulow, who are the President's outside counsel. I know that they would love to see this report before it's made public or sent to Congress. They know that they're likely not going to see it, and now Barr has said that the White House is not going to be consulted at all about this. But I suspect that Rudy Giuliani may have concerns about the fact that the White House counsel's office is not going to look at this. I mean, particularly when you consider Rod Rosenstein's involvement in signing those FISA warrants way back when this investigation was getting going. Now, having Rosenstein still there through this process is political insulation for the President. But again, the President is putting an awful lot of faith and trust in Bill Barr. But I would assume that because of his stellar reputation, Barr is going to go through this thing with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that nothing is released publicly that shouldn't be out there. And, you know, you're talking about intimate conversations between the President and his top aides. That's stuff that you want to not get out into the public domain.
Absolutely. Excellent reporting from our chief White House correspondent, John Roberts. Stand by, John. We're going to get back to you in a moment. I want to bring in Chris Wallace, Fox News Sunday host. We were talking a moment ago. We had an inkling this might be coming out any moment now. So I appreciate you tap dancing with me a little bit. This is a two-page letter, so it's pretty brief. And what stands out for you, Chris?
Well, it strikes me as an eminently reasonable offer, or not really an offer, a declaration by the Attorney General. The fact is that the report was only given to at 5 o'clock a week ago, so 7 days ago, to Bill Barr. He then summarized it on Sunday. The idea that he was going to be able to make the whole report public, having dealt with all the issues, as you've pointed out, grand jury testimony, intelligence information, you know, that he'd be able to do that by this Tuesday in about 9 days seemed like a reach. As I say, I think it seems like a pretty reasonable position for the Attorney General to take, and particularly as you and John have been talking about the fact that the White House is not going to get a look at the report before Congress does or the public does. Having said that, my guess is that the Democrats are going to say it's an offer they can't accept. Well, and that they will say, well, there's already had been talk that, you know, if they didn't turn it over right away, it was a cover-up, that there's a scrubbing. You know, yes, the White House counsel isn't going to take a look at it, but the president's appointee, the Attorney General, is going to take a look at it, and he's going to be able to make decisions. So I suspect Republicans are going to say, gee, this is pretty generous, this is pretty reasonable, pretty transparent, and Democrats are going to label it a cover-up or a delay, even though we're only talking about a matter of a couple of weeks.
Right. Chris, I want to get to the details of the letter again, but first I want to stay on your point because it's important. Of course, the Attorney General serves at the pleasure of the president. He was nominated by this president, but when Democrats over the last few days have been suggesting that he's sort of a pawn of the president, and in the words of Chuck Schumer yesterday, he said that Bill Barr is delaying the release of the Mueller report. The fact that this letter does a number of things says, A, as Attorney General, I'm going to get a big chunk of this 400-page report out by mid-April. B, he's willing to testify May 1st, May 2nd before the Senate and the House, the Attorney General. And C, I'm not giving the White House a look beforehand. Does it make it harder for Democrats to claim this is some kind of a cover-up?
It may make it harder, but it doesn't make it impossible. And I will predict that they're going to say, you know, we don't want to see Bill Barr's version of this report. We want to see, I'm just telling you what I think predict their action is going to be. We want to see the full report. We not only want to see the full report, we want to see all of the underlying documents, all the investigations, all the interviews with witnesses. They're going to fight for transparency. Look, regardless of the fact that I think the Democrats are going to try to move off this to some degree and get to other issues like health care and equal pay and education, they see it a political advantage to continuing to hammer the president on various investigations. And the floor of the House will pass some legislation, probably go nowhere in the Senate, but you're also going to see folks like Adam Schiff and Elijah Cummings and Jerry Nadler continue to investigate the president. And, you know, they're not, I promise you what they're not going to say. This is a great idea. Thank you, Bill Barr. We're satisfied with this. No more questions. I promise that's not the tack they're going to take on this.
That seems a safe assumption. I want to run something else past you by Chris. As you were talking, I was going through the letter. About midway through, Bill Barr pushes back on a letter from the Democrat, Jerry Nadler, who had suggested that the letter of last weekend was a quote-unquote 4-page summary of the special counsel's review. Bill Barr writes to the Democrats and Republicans, my March 24 letter of last Sunday was not and did not purport to be an exhaustive recounting of the special counsel's investigation or report. As my letter made clear, my notification to Congress and the public provided, pending release of the report, a summary of its principal conclusions, that is, its bottom line. He goes on to say it's 400 pages, Chris. That could be aimed at the Democrat saying, look, your narrative is not true about me trying to cover this up. But, Chris, it could also be aimed at Republicans who have been celebrating, right, in the sense of, look, folks, I was not saying this is done. I gave you 4 pages. There's a whole lot more in here.
Listen, you had Robert Mueller on the issue of collusion. He basically gave the president, at least according to what we know from Barr, and I can't imagine that Barr mischaracterized it, because if so, my guess is Robert Mueller would have cried foul, that he basically gave him a clean bill of health on the issue of collusion, that there was no cooperation, coordination between either President Trump and the campaign and the Kremlin and the Russia. So on that, he gave him a clean bill of health. Obviously, it was a much more mixed bill of health when it came to obstruction. And, you know, you had that quote, pretty interesting quote, that Barr quoted from Mueller saying, you know, there's there's not enough to charge a crime, but there's also not enough to exonerate the president. There is going to be some stuff that I think it's obvious in these 400 pages that the White House isn't going to like. And that's why I think, you know, call it exoneration now and take your victory lap and say we want to have accountability for all the people who got over their skis and saying that there was collusion. But they're going to have to deal with some stuff. There's no question about it when we see the whole report or as much of it as we end up seeing.